I promise you, I will proudly put my record against his any day of the week.
I'm proud to strongly endorse Kamala Harris to be the 47th president of the United States of America.
I don't care who's president or vice president or running for office. All of these leaders should be protected, and America should feel safe and secure that our leaders aren't going to be assassinated.
What a time. Hello, I'm Robert Constant in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. Vice President Kamala Harris now hitting the campaign trail today in Milwaukee. As CBS News estimates, she has secured enough endorsements from delegates to be considered the likely Democratic presidential nominee. We should note, of course, these endorsements are not legally binding and could change, but unlikely at this point. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries endorsed Harris's bid for president today. Meanwhile, President Biden has ended his COVID-19 self-isolation and returned to Washington for what is now just one term for him in the White House. His return coincides with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his visit to the United States. We'll have more on his trip coming up soon. But first, we start with Finn Gomez and Nancy Cordes on the 2024 campaign. Finn, of course, our political director at CBS News. Nancy Cordes, the chief White House correspondent. Great to have both of you. Nancy, you're standing outside at the White House, the president returning to Washington. What's it like among Biden's confidants and closest advisors to have him back at the residence, back at the White House after these torturous few days in Rehoboth Beach?
A lot of long faces at the White House, frankly, Bob. No one wanted things to end this way. These are people who have dedicated 4 years in some cases, decades in other cases, to this man, to Joe Biden. They were all in on another bid for the White House. And so it's really bittersweet for them. They're glad that he's feeling better. They're glad he's come back, but certainly he's coming back to a much different political reality than the one he left. He's now a lame duck president with just 6 more months to accomplish whatever it is that he thinks he can to cement his legacy. And that's why we're told the president is going to be giving this primetime address tomorrow night, first to explain to the American people in public, not with a statement, but actually on camera, why it is that he decided to step aside and not seek re-election, and then what his goals are for the next 6 months and what he wants to do.
Stick with us, Nancy. Finn, great to see you. What's the latest with former President Trump? You track his campaign very closely.
Yeah, Bob, in the first extensive remarks we've heard from the former president and the Republican nominee, first extensive remarks since Vice President Harris moved to the top of the ticket. He held a conference call with reporters. He went after her on the Biden administration's policy on immigration and the southern border. He also said that he would be willing to debate her multiple times, but he did say he did stick to his position that he bowed out of the ABC News debate, which was scheduled to be held in September.
And Finn, let's stick with you for a moment. And then, Nancy, I would love your take on this as well. There's so much talk among Democrats about the vice presidential selection for Vice President Harris. What's your latest reporting?
Yeah, Bob, well, the situation is fluid, but I did hear from a top Democrat close to the Harris campaign and the DNC who tells me that 4 names have moved up the list of consideration to be the running mate for Vice President Harris. Those names are Senator Mark Kelly from Arizona, Roy Cooper, the governor of North Carolina, Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, and, of course, Andy Beshear of Kentucky. Now, of those 4 names, this source told me that Mark Kelly has recently moved up in the list, in part because he has a strong relationship with Democratic donors. Donors really like him. Also, he's got a very strong relationship with Vice President Harris going back to their time in the Senate. As well, he comes from a border state. The Harris campaign is looking at a Sun Belt strategy more so than a Rust Belt strategy that involves Arizona, of course, Kelly's home state, and also because of his background with guns and guns violence and within his own family. That issue will be looked at and moved at the top of key issues for the campaign, something they can focus on as well. But so this source tells me that Kelly is someone that they're looking at specifically in the last 24 hours.
Nancy, what are you hearing on that front? And how do you expect President Biden to handle his own role on the campaign in the coming weeks?
Bob, when you talk to Democratic operatives, both inside and outside the campaign, two names consistently come up. One is North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper. He and Kamala Harris have a long history together. They were both state AGs at the same time. They have a great relationship. They were out campaigning together recently. And many Democrats say that that would be a natural fit between Kamala Harris and a like-minded Democrat who has shown that he can win in a battleground state like Roy Cooper. The other name that they frequently mention is Josh Shapiro, the Pennsylvania governor of the largest battleground state in the country. He and Harris also have deep ties. They've also campaigned together recently. They both come from a law and order background. And so Democratic operatives, whether they're connected to this vetting process or not, and generally they aren't, they consider those two to have something of a head start. But when I speak to the campaign, what they argue is it's too soon to be winnowing anyone out. They're at the very early stages. Everyone wants to know who this pick is going to be, but vetting is a process that does not take place over 24 or 48 hours. It usually takes weeks, if not months, and they stress that they're just at the very beginning of this process, even though they don't have that much time.
Finn, are any of your Trump sources nervous about Senator J.D. Vance being Trump's running mate now that everything's changed?
No, actually, Donald Trump was asked about that on this call that I referred to earlier, and he said that he has no intention of replacing J.D. Vance, as we've seen some reporting. The fact the matter is that they believe that he still adds to their Rust Belt strategy. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, because of his biography, because of his ties in his background with the Appalachian area, they feel that they feel strongly that he can help them win in those states.
Nancy, what are you hearing about President Biden and his return to the White House? You said long faces among the aides, but he's getting ready for this major national address Wednesday night. What do you believe he's going to say? How long is it going to be? What should we be expecting?
Well, they are still working on the speech, so we don't have a length just yet. But what I've been told is that he's going to talk pretty specifically about some of the policies that he wants to advance over in the next 6 months. First and foremost, one of his biggest goals is to find a way to bring home the up to 8 American-Israeli hostages who have been held by Hamas by some 8 months now. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, is here in Washington this week. The two men are going to sit down later this week. These negotiations have gotten tantalizingly close many times between Hamas, Israel, the U.S., and Qatar. That will obviously be topic number one when Biden and Netanyahu meet face to face. But beyond that, I'm also told that he really does want to try to move ahead on laying out his vision for a reformed U.S. Supreme Court. This is something that he has been talking about for a while. He's been mulling over with experts. He is said to have great concerns about what he views as some recent ethical lapses on the court. And he did just add an event to his schedule on Monday, Bob. It is a visit to the LBJ Presidential Library for a civil rights event that he had to cancel a couple of weeks ago. And so that could be a fitting backdrop if he decides that he wants to finally unveil those Supreme Court proposals.
March 31st, 1968 with LBJ, July 21st, 2024 for President Biden. 2 days that will live on in American political history when presidents withdrew. Finn Gomez, Nancy Cortez, thank you.
You're welcome.
New Jersey Democratic Senator Bob Menendez will resign effective August 20th. He was convicted on federal bribery charges last week. Menendez maintains his innocence and plans to appeal. Vermont Senator Peter Welch delivered the news on the Senate floor, sharing that the upper chamber received a resignation letter earlier today.
Without objection, the letter will be printed in the record and spread upon the journal.
Menendez has been facing pressure to resign from fellow Democrats and Republicans, including Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. As Vice President Kamala Harris ascends to the top of the Democratic ticket, Democrats are wondering Who will end up as her number 2? We'll talk to the Democratic National Committee chair about those who might be under consideration. You're streaming America Decides. President Biden's decision to endorse Vice President Harris has so far paid off politically. In the last 48 hours, the party has rallied behind the vice president to take the torch from President Biden as the nominee. Here was Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro earlier today.
I've known her 20 years, just about 20 years. She is tough as nails. She doesn't suffer fools. Like me, she's been a prosecutor. She stood up for the rule of law, and she has always stood for the people.
The chair of the Democratic National Committee, Jamie Harrison, is joining us now. Thanks for being here at the table.
Thank you for having me.
Vice President Harris on the campaign trail today. What's her goal at this moment for the Democratic Party?
Well, listen, I think the goal for the vice president is to make the case, to prosecute the case against Donald Trump. And, I watched the speech. There were a ton of people there and a lot of energy. And we see that excitement. It's a grassroots excitement with her. We look at the amount of money that has come in, a record, over $100 million over a course of 24 hours. I've raised a lot in my Senate race. I've never seen money coming in like that. And a lot of volunteers signing up for the campaign. So she's bringing a lot of energy.
How are Democrats going to handle the attacks from former President Trump and his campaign, from Senator J.D. Vance, and from the Republican Party wholesale?
Well, I think it's more about how the Republicans are going to handle the attacks from the Democratic Party, because we got a lot to focus on as it relates to Donald Trump.
What's your number one target with the Republicans?
Well, think about it. It's Project 2025. You look at it, and as the American people learn more about it, they reject it. And they know that Donald Trump is closely tied. Many of his senior advisors, even though he's trying to deny it now.
He keeps disavowing it publicly.
Yeah, but you can't disavow it publicly. And a lot of the people who worked for you and who want to work for you are working very much on making sure that is front and center.
Are you convinced, though, that people across the country, everyday voters who might not be political insiders, like you, like me, who covers all of this, do you think they're really plugged into what Project 2025 and the Heritage Foundation is?
Yes, we have seen a tremendous spike. When it becomes a topic of conversation at the BET Awards, it has broken through in terms of many communities who probably normally wouldn't even be interested in this type of thing. But when they go and they research it and they find out what it's about taking away Americans' freedoms. It's about limiting the safety net that we have in this country. And so folks are going to reject that, as they have rejected the Republicans' attempts to take away women's right to control their own bodies. They're rejecting, seniors are rejecting gutting Medicare and Social Security, taking away the Affordable Care Act. And so this is a very bad thing for the Republican Party, and we're going to make sure that the American people understand who wrote it and who's responsible and why we cannot allow this to be implemented.
But help me understand, you're the head of the Democratic Party, running the Democratic National Committee. If Republicans make direct references to Vice President Harris's race or gender, or if they make an indirect reference, we've seen some House members make some indirect references in recent days, how exactly is the DNC going to handle it?
We're going to hit them back on it. What
does that mean?
We are going to, from social media to press releases, responses, to interviews, we are going to make sure that the American people understand who is the party of intolerance. Who is a party that is anti-diversity in this nation? The thing that makes America great is that we are a diverse nation. No other nation on the planet is as diverse as the American people are. That's part of our strength. That is what makes us so great.
Is there anything going on inside the DNC now that Vice President Harris is the presumptive nominee to focus on attacks specifically about her, because you've been so focused for a long time on President Biden?
Well, actually, we've had divisions within the DNC because of the early attacks that the Republicans have had on the vice president throughout her vice presidency. And we'll continue to ramp that up and put resources to combat this disinformation and just nasty politics. It is just nasty politics, but that's what you expect from the Republican conference.
Do you want, as the party chair, for her to have a running mate announced before the convention?
Well, we have set up this process so that if the vice president becomes the nominee, or anybody who becomes the nominee, that we have set up this process so that they know that if you want to comply with the laws in all 50 states, we have to be done with our selection process for both the presidential nominee and the vice presidential nominee by August 7th.
Do you expect any Democrat to challenge Vice President Harris at this point for the nomination?
Well, you know, we've heard rumors that Marianne Williamson, who ran earlier, mentioned that she was going to do it. The problem is you have to get 300 signatures from delegates at the DNC in order to get on the ballot. I just think it's a tough hill to climb. You know, at this point, it might not even be a hill, it might be Mount Everest.
You're from the South.
Yeah.
I've covered you in South Carolina for many years. Would you like to see a vice presidential contender from the South so the Democrats can maybe make a bigger play in that region?
Well, that is not up to me.
I know, but you've been trying to build the Democratic Party in the South for decades.
I have been.
So would it help to have someone from the South? Would it help? Would it be helpful?
Well, listen, I'm going to leave that to our nominee to make a decision.
Would it be helpful?
In the end of the day,
Governor Beshear?
What I want is a winning ticket.
Which region of the country do Democrats really need to do better
listen,
this time around?
We're trying to do better in all of the regions.
But especially the South, right?
I have run a 50-state strategy in order to make sure that we're investing in red states across the country and trying to turn them purple and then to get the purple ones bluer. And so I trust our nominee will pick the best person that will be that part of that winning ticket.
Is there any litmus test you have for a vice presidential nominee?
I'm not a presidential nominee, so I don't have a litmus test. All I want is the two best people that we have in our party to run and to run hard and to win this November.
Jamie Harrison, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Good to see the DNC chair. And as fighting in Gaza continues, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu now landing in Washington. We'll have more on this high-stakes visit coming up next with House Minority Whip Catherine Clark. You're streaming America Decides.
I will tell my friends on both sides of the aisle that regardless who the American people choose as their next president, Israel remains America's indispensable and strong ally in the Middle East.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in Washington and will address a joint session of Congress tomorrow. This as Capitol Hill remains divided over Israel's conduct in the war.
I don't think he should be here. I don't think Netanyahu should be here.
Let's bring in House Minority Whip Catherine Clark. Congresswoman, thanks for being here. What do you expect to hear from Netanyahu tomorrow, and how will House Democrats handle it? Do you expect protests from your colleagues?
You know, I just met with the parents of Hirsch Goldberg Poland, and I hope that I hear from the Prime Minister that he is going to bring the hostages home, that he is going to rush aid with the urgency it deserves to the people of Gaza, and that he is going to end this war. That's what I hope to hear from him tomorrow. And I think that we will have protests here in the Capitol. They are already starting. People have the right to do that. But I hope that they will remain nonviolent and calm.
Do you expect House Democrats to protest inside of the chamber?
I do not. I think that we are clear that there are, you know, we have rules of decorum. We are being visited by a head of state, and we will treat that with the sobriety that it deserves.
Do you think it's a mistake to have the Prime Minister here?
Well, you know, I think it's really too bad that we had the president of Kenya just recently, and Speaker Johnson couldn't find time to have an African leader, but has put this, speech in when it was so close to completing our work on appropriations bills. But Israel is an ally, and we will hear from the Prime Minister tomorrow.
Turning to the presidential race, Vice President Harris now out on the campaign trail, the presumptive nominee. Is there any talk in among your colleagues about having someone else run, or is there almost universal acceptance and confidence in having the vice president as the presumptive nominee?
Yeah, there is universal, not just acceptance, we are excited. Kamala Harris has just lit up and energized this race. She is the leader that we need for this moment. I mean, really, if you could design a presidential candidate, it would be Kamala Harris. Attorney General, the largest state in the country, a U.S. Senator, a vice president. She has already just electrified voters. 58,000 volunteers in the first very few days of this election. $100 million in donations, swelling of small grassroots donations. We are very excited to get to work, get on the ground, talking to voters about Kamala Harris and making sure that she is the 47th president of the United States.
Former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, a close ally of yours, was involved in the discussions with President Biden and his aides about the decision to leave the presidential race. Do you believe that House Democrats really did have a role to play in nudging the president towards that decision?
You know, we are so grateful to President Biden. I know there were many conversations with him, but what a patriotic and selfless act to step aside, to rise up and endorse your vice president. There aren't too many people who have that kind of power, but it isn't a surprise from Joe Biden. That's who he is. He's known for his courage and his grit and his incredible years of service. He will go down as one of our most effective presidents, and we are glad that we have been here for him and get to continue our work together until the end of his term.
And finally here, Congresswoman, in Washington, this is the season of mentioning names as the vice president considers her options for running mate. I know you believe it's her decision and hers alone to make, but any names you would mention as good possibilities, strong options for VP?
You know, I trust Kamala Harris to restore women's rights, to defeat Donald Trump. I'll trust her to make this pick as well.
Are you open to being considered?
I don't think that's going to happen. I like my life right here in the House.
Oh, you never know. Then that wasn't a firm no. Catherine Clark, the House Minority Whip, thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Now that President Biden is out of the race, what did the polling numbers tell us about a Trump-Harris matchup? We'll take a closer look at the CBS News polling that we've just revealed in recent hours. That's coming up next on America Decides.
I think that people have been really hard on her as the vice president, that she didn't really get a fair shake.
I don't care for her at all, and so I think that we need someone else in there. If someone else was to get it, I would like for him to be a lot more moderate and not so far left.
Welcome back to America Decides. Voters in battleground states are sharing their thoughts, as you just heard, about Vice President Kamala Harris. But how do they feel about a likely matchup with former President Donald Trump? CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, joins us now. Anthony, what does a Trump-Harris matchup look like?
Hey there, Bob. Well, look, we got a little bit of a preview of this when we were polling about what was then a hypothetical matchup. And in that hypothetical matchup, when we did this going in the weekend, it was Harris down 3 points to Trump, but she wasn't down as much as Joe Biden was, right? But the biggest thing I want to watch going forward and show everybody is right after Biden stepped aside, we asked how this made you feel about motivation to vote. And there were these 4 in 10 Democrats who told us that they were more motivated to vote now. Now, why is that important? Because all throughout in the polling, we had been finding that Democrats were trailing Republicans on saying they were likely to vote. Some of them weren't as excited about Joe Biden, didn't like the matchup necessarily. This is a gap we're going to have to watch. Does it close? Does that motivation translate into Democrats saying they're going to turn out more? That'll affect the polling. Ultimately, it'll affect the election, but that's probably one of the pivotal things, Bob.
What else are you learning about the Biden coalition and how that could translate to Vice President Harris?
Okay, couple of things. One is we're not going to necessarily be able to parse every single 1 or 2 point difference, but we do see when we compared the Harris versus Trump, Biden versus Trump, Harris is +3 better than Biden among black voters Okay, so they would either both, but she would still have a ways to go to match the 2020 numbers, but better than Biden there. Okay, look at women voters, because this is going to be important. Look, we know the campaign, you've reported, they're going to raise women's issues. They're going to try to get women voters. They won them last time. Really comparable to Joe Biden, at least at the start. Did these numbers move? That's just a small sampling of the demographic numbers that we're going to have to watch, but those are a couple of key ones, somewhat comparable, a little bit better than Joe Biden, at least to start, Bob.
Anthony Salvanto, as ever, thank you for your analysis and for your polling. Let's bring in now our political panel, Molly Ball and Sabrina Rodriguez. Molly is a senior political correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. Sabrina is a national politics reporter for the Washington Post. Great to have both of you here. Sabrina, let's begin with you. You're on the road. What are you learning about Vice President Harris and her return to the campaign trail, this time as the likely nominee?
I mean, the first thing that we're seeing right now is a level of renewed energy and excitement around the election. How that plans out, and even just hearing, the segment now on polling. I mean, how we see that panning out with those key voters that Democrats need to turn out in the election in November, I think is still an open question. But for Democratic base voters, there is no question that this has sort of woken them up. We know so much about the double haters and the voters, the softening support that Biden had with voters of color and young voters. And we're definitely hearing from those voters. Right now, I'm in Indianapolis with Zeta Phi Beta's Grand Boulé that Kamala Harris will be speaking at tomorrow. And just talking to the Black women here, you hear this energy, this excitement, them tuning in, them really wanting to push. But these are the voters that we know we're going to turn out for Joe Biden as well. So again, I think it's a focus right now on, okay, what about those voters who were undecided before?
And Molly, what's your take as a reporter on all of that? You now have what's looking like a Trump-Harris race. How does that play out in the eyes of your sources, strategists in both parties?
Well, I think Sabrina really put her finger on it, which is that enthusiasm is not the same as percentages of votes, right? And so while she is clearly having this giant honeymoon with the Democratic base, and even Democrats who were the most hopeful about this switcheroo, who are pushing the hardest to get Joe Biden out of the race, have been surprised and impressed with, the level of fundraising. She's raised $100 million in the space of basically a day. That is something the party really needed. And we are seeing this level of energy among the base that has a lot of Democrats cautiously optimistic. But look, she still starts this race as essentially an underdog. She still has to define herself. While the Republican Party is racing to define her as a liberal, I thought the voter that we heard from, the Nevada voter earlier in the segment, was very interesting. She is perceived as more liberal than Biden in the context of a Democratic Party that most voters view as more liberal than they are, particularly those swing voters. So how does she position herself on policy? It's all fine to come out and say, I'm a prosecutor, I'm going to nail Donald Trump to the wall. She's got to say where she stands on policy and how she hopes to define herself on the ideological spectrum.
How do you expect her, Sabrina, to handle the attacks?
I mean, we've seen her try and shut them down as much as possible. And we saw, in her first rally today and being on the road, she's really trying to drive home that contrast with Donald Trump that we saw Biden really attempt to do in these months, but she can obviously do it more forcefully with that energy that she has and that boost that she has in these past couple of days. But I think the challenge is going to be, we already see Republicans, Donald Trump, J.D. Vance on the road last night, already slamming her as the borders are. And that's something that we've been hearing for months and months. I mean, that's not a new criticism launched at her, but she is going to have to maneuver, tackling that one in specific, because we know how much voters care about the issue of immigration and what they feel has been a failure from the Biden administration. So she really has to figure out how she's also going to navigate any kind of contrast she wants to draw between herself and President Joe Biden. And I think that is absolutely going to be key to her really getting those voters, is not just her trying to position herself as a moderate that can really appeal to swing voters, but also trying to say, I'm super supportive of the administration I work for, but here's how I might do some things differently, or here's where I think we could do better and needed to do better.
And Molly, it's not just going to be attacks on policy. I just spoke with DNC Chair Jamie Harrison about, we've already heard from House Republicans alluding to her race, her gender. Former President Trump is known for diminishing his opponents. Little Marco when it came to Senator Marco Rubio. Lion Ted when it came to Senator Ted Cruz. He's already attacked Vice President Harris's intelligence. What do you expect from the Trump campaign and from the former president? And how do you believe Democrats are going to handle that?
Well, Democrats certainly don't put anything past the Trump campaign. They expect them to sort of go into the gutter, as it were, particularly with these types of racial and gendered attacks. Of course, those types of attacks are something that Kamala Harris has dealt with her whole career, not to say her whole life. And I covered her 2020 primary campaign, which didn't go so well. But we did see her being willing to play the race card against Joe Biden in that famous interaction that they had in the debate.
Why, just to pause you for a moment, why didn't it go so well? As someone who covered that campaign, what was your assessment?
It's an interesting resonance with what she's going through now, because she could never define who she was as a candidate. She didn't try to be the tough-on-crime prosecutor in a full-throated way because she was too afraid of the left wing of the party, but she also didn't come out as a full-throated liberal candidate. We saw her take about 10 different positions on health care. And so I think, what Sabrina was talking about with immigration is going to be a fascinating test for her as a candidate, is she's going to have to come out and say where she stands on both this administration's immigration policy, which has gone, I think, so badly and been such a black mark for the Biden-Harris administration, but also what her vision would be going forward and how she would try to handle this very difficult issue if she were elected president, and the stands that she takes on issues like that. And again, I think we saw in 2020, she was the process of taking a stand was very tortured for her. She wasn't good at it. She doesn't have a very well-defined ideology. So I think that's going to determine a lot about the shape of her campaign.
And quickly, Sabrina, what are you hearing on the Veep stakes? I have to seem to ask everyone that today.
I mean, it's like the $1 million question, I feel, and it's been interesting even just talking to the women here in Indianapolis about who they're speculating it could be. I think something interesting from talking to the Black women voters at this convention has been them all in agreement that she should pick a white man, and that would be something that could potentially help her with that race question that is going to be, I mean, we know that Republicans are going to launch attacks tied to her race. So I think that's something that will definitely be front of mind. We're already seeing it in the conversation with Democratic operatives. But I think just one big thing for us to keep in mind is how unprecedented this timeline is. Like, she has to define herself. She has to define her vision for the future. She has to pick a VP. She has to officially secure the nomination. And she has to do all of that in under 4 months.
And there is always peril, as history shows us, with this compressed time period. 2 words, Tom Eagleton. Molly Ball and Sabrina Rodriguez, thank you. The head of the Secret Service resigns 1 day after telling Congress her agency should have done more to prevent the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. Scott McFarlane is on Capitol Hill with what's next for the Secret Service. You're streaming America Decides. President Biden says he will appoint a new head of Secret Service soon. Kimberly Cheadle resigned as the agency's director today under immense pressure from lawmakers following the Trump assassination attempt. In a letter sent to her staff, Cheadle said, quote, "The Secret Service's solemn mission is to protect our nation's leaders and financial infrastructure. On July 13th, we fell short on that mission." Cheadle's resignation comes just 1 day after she testified before the House Oversight and Accountability Committee. During the hearing, House members on both sides of the aisle demanded Cheadle step aside as head of the Secret Service. Scott McFarlane joins us now, our congressional correspondent. Scott, thanks for being here. What happened yesterday that led to this decision?
She lost the room, and ultimately she lost her job. Bob, in this month full of shocking news, this was no surprise at all. Kimberly Cheadle testified for about 6 hours before that House panel and was frustrating the lawmakers in the process, not answering some of their point-blank questions about the evidence, about the timeline, about potential vulnerabilities, what was missed, why it was missed. She kept citing the ongoing investigations, saying she wanted the investigations to be completed. But this panel, this House Oversight Committee, was just ravenous for information, and her non-answers just didn't sit well with this group. Jerry Connolly of Virginia told me yesterday he's not big on calling for resignations, thinks it's a Washington cliche, it doesn't really fix problems. Take a listen to what he said today.
You didn't walk in that room yesterday knowing you'd call for her resignation.
Not at all.
It was what she said.
It's what she said and how she said it and her comportment, and I lost all confidence in her in that hearing. If the point of her being there was to try to reassure us and give us some confidence in her leadership, she did the very opposite, but across both sides of the aisle.
In her statement to colleagues, Bob, she says she doesn't think this incident should define the Secret Service. And President Biden, in his statement, credited Cheadle for showing integrity. But there are now a series of investigations. The Secret Service has an internal probe. The FBI is leading the investigation on site at the shooting site. There is a House task force that was announced today to investigate for Congress. And there are Homeland Security Department reviews underway, too. This is just getting started.
Scott, you covered the Butler, Pennsylvania assassination attempt, and we applaud your courage under those tough circumstances. Do you have some new reporting about the investigations on that front?
Yeah, there's a local investigation going on as well. The Pennsylvania State Police are investigating the local homicide and injuries. The local police in Pennsylvania are. It's the FBI investigating the attempt on the former president. At a separate hearing today, the Pennsylvania State Police Commissioner testified that there were local police snipers who had a view of that roof from which the would-be assassin fired the shots, but left their post to go search for the shooter, who was deemed a suspicious person minutes before he pulled the trigger. The investigations will likely show more revelations about the sequence of events, those critical minutes after he was first spotted and deemed suspicious, and the moments when the shots were fired. I'll tell you something else, Bob. My cell phone blew up when this resignation was announced from people I met on the ground in Butler, those who were attending the rally with whom I've been communicating ever since, some of whom said there had to be accountability. Somebody had to answer for this, and sadly, somebody had to lose their job.
And quickly, Scott, any new reporting about House Democrats and their fundraising?
Yeah, House Democrats, by the way, who are trying to pivot now to an argument that those AR-15s need to be controlled, reported a really good second quarter despite troubles in the Biden campaign. They have a fundraising advantage now over Republicans as they try to regain majorities in the House. Bob, it's going to be a tough sledding, but they think that financial advantage, nearly $500,000 on average for those frontline Democrats, has made them well situated and potentially with an invigoration from the vice president's candidacy.
Scott McFarland, our congressional correspondent on Capitol Hill, thank you so much for your reporting. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Bob.
So what exactly is a so-called brat summer? How British pop star Charlie XCX's album has become a part of the presidential race. Your streaming America Decides.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you.
That is one of many videos posted online over the last few days referring to likely Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris. It refers to her as a, quote, brat. So how did this viral sensation begin, and why is her campaign embracing it? Let's explain. Shortly after President Biden endorsed his vice president on Sunday, singer-songwriter Charlie XCX appeared to do the same. She posted, quote, Kamala is brat on her X account, brat being the name of her newly released album just last month. Not long after that, Harris's campaign sought to capitalize upon the show of support from the superstar, rebranding its social media sites to adopt a brat theme. Since then, bratty messages and memes have been flooding the internet. Abigail DeKosnik is here to explain all of this. She is an associate professor for the Berkeley Center for New Media at the University of California, Berkeley. Great to have you with us, Professor. What is the power and the impact of having this online culture, especially the brat idea from Charlie XCX, come into a presidential campaign?
Well, I think Charlie XCX did the Harris campaign a tremendous favor by making the meme of the summer and the fall the same night that Harris was essentially promoted to the presidential nominee. Charlie XCX's Brat is an incredible album released last month. It is all over TikTok. It has swept through social media platforms. Young people are using it as the backdrop, as the soundtrack for a lot of different memes, but now it is Kamala Harris's meme. Now that campaign owns the brat meme, and that's great for that campaign because millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions of young voters are going to associate Kamala Harris with one of the most electrifying cultural moments that's happening right now, which is brat.
So why is brat so influential this summer as a cultural idea, and how is it breaking through in ways you've detected as an academic?
Well, I think brat is possibly a great transformation and sequel to the Barbie memes that took over last summer. Brat is green, Barbie was pink, and Barbie is kind of a very respectable, very put together woman. The Barbie figure is is unquestionable in her beauty, her appropriateness. And the brat girl is totally different than that. The brat girl, as Charlie XCX has said, is sort of, falling down at the party, making the rude comment, cracking the bad jokes, not all the way put together. But there's something about the brat girl that is endearing because of that, and that's fearless. And the brat girl is brave enough to say what she thinks, is honest, owns all the parts of herself, including all her flaws. And there's something about that come from behind, underdog, unexpected winner spirit that is the brat girl. And I think that Kamala Harris coming into the presidential nominee a bit unexpectedly, feeling sort of almost last minute-y because the convention is so soon, is a great match for the brat girl image.
And finally, when I first heard about this, I'd heard about Charlie XCX and her album, but I hesitate as a reporter to call any political figure a brat because knowing the definition of the word, but it seems, based on your academic analysis, that this is actually a reference and an allusion to perceived authenticity versus any kind of statement about the character of the political figure.
Exactly. It's a transformation, just as, African-American vernacular English turned the word bad into good. Similarly, brat means brave. Brat means out there and claiming it. Brat means standing in your power. Brat also means, importantly for the Harris campaign, yes, I'm flawed. Yes, I've got parts of me that are not beautiful, that are not correct, that are not all the way put together. And go ahead and come for me. I'm ready for it. I can take it. So it's that outspokenness, it's that courage, it's that willingness to be completely yourself. That is brat, and that is Kamala Harris.
President Jimmy Carter once stood arm in arm with the Allman Brothers Band, and political figures like the Grateful Dead have been there for President Clinton and others in the past. Now we have Charlie XCX with Vice President Harris. Abigail DeKosnik, thank you for your time. We appreciate it. And that does it for us today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.